If we can come now to you're in an election, we're watching this very closely in America because, as often as said in this country, American elections are as important for us, frankly, and their outcomes can be as important for us as our own selection of our governments and prime ministers in this country. What's coming is, it seems to me, to be extraordinarily important. Now, you've approached this with an admirable set of insights about beliefs and values and where people sit on the political spectrum. Where would you put the two contenders for the White House on the political spectrum? You know, left versus right. I mean, but you wouldn't really call the current president particularly committed to a philosophical view. He's more a pragmatist, even a deal maker, a very unusual character, probably the product of a divided America as much as the cause of it today, I would have thought, if I can say that from this side of the world, versus a man who seems to move all over the chessboard in terms of his position and who couldn't necessarily be classified as a normal left of centre Democrat alternative for the White House. How do we understand these two figures? Because what we get in Australia is the Trump derangement syndrome dominating in the media. It's anything but Trump. So they don't examine, we're not hearing very much in the Australian media of the truth about where Biden and all the people who are with him would want to take America and what that might mean for the rest of the world.
Yeah, and they don't talk about it either because they know that their platform is not popular with Americans. And I don't think it would be popular with Australians either. I mean, what would be of concern to you guys, obviously, are, you know, how tough we are on China, our willingness to maintain presence and military relationships, diplomatic relationships in the Pacific. I don't think Biden would retract in any way, but I do think he would certainly take a much softer tone with China, you know, and probably default back to kind of the traditional Washington think tank academic idea of China, of, you know, kind of just playing a middle ground, which it was fair to be tricked by China for a while, but I think the awakening of China's true intentions have to be out there in the open, and Trump is much more bold about making those kind of statements and making those kind of deals. So that's a pretty key difference there. I agree with your assessment of our current president. He's not going to have a philosophical discussion of conservatism with you. That's not where he comes from. He does happen to govern that way. He does happen to make those decisions in accordance with those values, according to his instincts. But for him, it's more instinctual than it is you know, philosophical or yeah. I mean, he supported Democrats in the past. He supported Republicans, and so, you know, that is all true. But his governance has been highly conservative. He's taken our priorities and really ran with them, and you could argue that's because it's his team and he wants to win for his team. He takes his campaign promises extremely seriously. That's what's the one thing you've noticed over the last 4 years. He's been an extremely honest president in that regard. Now, of course, what you hear from the media is he's told more lies than any human being in the history of human beings. You know, yeah, he speaks extremely. He speaks in absolutisms. He speaks, sometimes carelessly. That's where these lies come from. But they're often, when you actually dive deep into the fact checks, they're often very silly. So as far as big campaign promises and policies, he's been very forthright with what he wants to do, and very bold about that. With Biden, you don't hear anything about policy these days, and that's interesting. Because he has very radical people on his policy agenda councils, whether it's on energy or the economy. He's got modern monetary theorists on the economy advisory board. He's got AOC on the energy board. This is not good either for the environment, ironically, or for American energy and jobs. And on a number of fronts. You know, this is not good policy. And as you noted, he's been a chameleon. Many Democrat leaders are. The Democrat Party has changed radically just in the last few years. So and again, why? fundamentally because they don't have limiting principles. And we talked about this briefly before. The left doesn't have limiting principles. Now, they would say that their principles and their values are fighting injustice and fighting inequality. If I'm being fair to them, I think that's what they would say. Those aren't limiting principles, though, right? There's no how. There's no how you actually obtain these goals. And that's a problem. It means you can change everything, and they have radically. It's how you can go from being strong on actual borders and illegal immigration to advocating for the complete opposite. It's how you can switch like that. And I think it's problematic. And, I'm not a fan of it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. To me, I was part of a reforming government, and we set out to obliterate all federal government debt and succeeded to do that. And as I look today around the world, I am truly staggered. I'm left without words to describe the concerns I have about the blowout in Western indebtedness, private, corporate, but particularly government. And I think the US is headed towards 27 trillion. It doesn't seem to be the subject of any serious debate. I know COVID's blown it out again. The economies, I think, right across the world will be, broadly speaking, very, very slow to really pick up and recover afterwards. It is a real issue. As one of your founding forefathers said, you want to enslave a nation, you can do it militarily or you can do it with debt. Where is the discussion about America's economic recovery? Because actually it was doing quite well until COVID hit. And the way in which it's handled coming out of it will be critically important. I would have thought the sort of AOC approach, the influence of that lady in particular in America of simply printing more money effectively, just manufacturing more money, will be a disaster, and that most Americans would see that.
You would think people do not care enough about that, and there's probably some reasons for that. To solve a debt crisis, you need a culture that actually wants to. And unfortunately, over the years, we've continued to attempt to buy votes with false promises. Hey, what about this new entitlement that you deserve? And once you have it, it's very hard to reel that back.
Yeah.
So our debt in particular is primarily driven by those entitlements, especially for our seniors. So Social Security and Medicare. When you have an aging population and increasingly a higher benefit increases, it's a recipe for disaster. This is what's causing the debt crisis in a lot of countries. And the problem with a crisis is you don't know it's a crisis until it happens. And so this is the other reason that people have continued to whistle past the graveyard, is because they say, well, you said at 30% debt to GDP ratio, it was going to be bad. And then we got to 50%, and then we got to 70%, 80%, 90%. And, is it really? It doesn't seem to matter. Inflation isn't increasing. It seems like we're fine. Maybe we're in a sort of new monetary reality. But of course that's playing with fire. And it goes against all reason and logic that this is possibly sustainable. Yeah, in history. It's somewhat more sustainable when we're the underlying currency of the world, but not forever. And we absolutely have to have that conversation. And political opportunism gets in the way too. If I want to have a conversation about entitlements in America, Democrats immediately accuse me of trying to hurt old people. I mean, it becomes an emotional conversation instead of a policy conversation.
Exactly the same here. And you mentioned entitlements. I remember being on Australia's budget committee, just 5 of us, charged by the Prime Minister with the job of obliterating debt. And the problem is that very little government expenditure now is discretionary. That is to say, most of it's locked in the form of entitlements. If you're in a certain category, you reach a certain age, you have a certain problem, you are entitled. And it's nearly impossible to wind those things back. But to come to the pointy end from where I sit in Australia at the moment in relation to America, you're a military man. The American military might has stood behind a peaceful global order. I mean, all right, you can criticise around the edges, and people do, and the left tries to mount arguments about moral equivalency and what have you between Western democratic countries and the rest or others. we don't live in those times anymore. We need to know that America is militarily strong. You're a military guy. What is your perspective, and how capable and ready is the American military in your view at the moment? Because in a debt-laden economy going forward, the temptation will be to find discretionary expenditure savings in defence.
I'm not that worried about it. The defense top line bill usually gets through. We're usually arguing over $20 or $30 billion, which it seems like a lot, but we're talking about a $750 billion top line for defense. So it's not all that much. The question is, where to put resources, where to spend time, where not to spend time, where to invest. And over the last couple of years, there's been a much bigger investment in the military and research and development and cyber and innovation and maintenance that had long gone underutilized, modernization of our nuclear triad, including submarines and bombers. And these things are important for deterrence. I know they make kind-hearted liberals hair stand on the back of their neck, but they mean something in the real world. And it's the only language that the Iranians speak. It's the only language that the Chinese speak and the North Koreans speak is deterrence. This is the big lesson that Trump brought forth versus Obama. Obama had a foreign policy and a campaign slogan called "Hope and Change," and it doesn't work. You can't pay Iranian ayatollahs off and hope they're going to change. It's just not how it works. You can't give moral credibility to Hamas and believe that they're just going to make peace in the Middle East. No, you have to engage with leverage and deterrence. And that's exactly what Trump's take on the Middle East was. And that's why you're seeing these massive and incredibly historic peace deals in the last few weeks. Now, there's been a long time coming. It's not that President Trump is some amazing strategist who's been studying this for years. It's just that his instincts are correct. I think he understands the basics, which is deterrence and leverage matter quite a bit. And he understands how relationships work. And so putting ourselves in that position, making a very strong stance against Iran, a very strong stance with Israel, it created a dynamic that allowed this peace deal to happen. And it's very impressive to see, frankly.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.